Hey everyone, we're starting a new section. We're going to start looking at cells, and this is going to be a good review for us too because we're focusing not necessarily on cell structure so much. We're going to come back, step out one more, and hit that one. But today we're going to start looking at reproduction of cells, mitosis and meiosis, and this is going to take us a few days. And so remember, we started off last semester with our molecular investigations by looking at what happens in here inside the nucleus when we reproduce. So we have DNA replicating, all the processes and all the controls and regulatory mechanisms that are involved with that. Now we're going to step out and look on the macro side, or well, we're still microscopic, but macro in terms of comparing to DNA. On the microscopic side, what is happening to the cell itself? You've already had a lot of experience with this in terms of your ninth grade bio or your introductory bio, so we're going to get more specific as we go. And we're going to start off today with just a quick review of our reproductive strategies. Cells reproduce in a variety of ways. So this first little picture here, this would be an example of yeast. And yeast goes through a process called budding or fission. And essentially this cell grows and grows and it pinches off a little bit of itself to form a new yeast cell. Bacterial cells do something similar. So these would be like bacteria is called like a bacillus, right? So it's a rod. These bacterial cells, they grow very, very quickly. You can grow a culture of bacteria overnight, and you can use that to isolate out a particular strain, or you can use it just to get a sample up for some testing. If you take a microbiology class in college, you would be growing a lot of bacteria. But they're very simple to grow because they reproduce very, very quickly. They make a lot of copies really fast, and there are some particular advantages to having that kind of growth strategy. And then thirdly, we've got mitosis, right? This is the classic biology example. We've all gone through our mitosis units, so we have a cell and we duplicate the chromosomes and it runs through your 4 phases and then they pinch off and you have 2 daughter cells that are exact copies of one another. This is for higher level organisms, eukaryotes in particular, so insect cells, plant cells, things like that. They use mitosis as their reproductive strategy for replacing their body cells. So this is grab any cell in your body except for the sex cells, and they are going to be going through mitosis if you're a higher level organism, or some kind of asexual fission-based reproduction if you are a lower level organism. And so that kind of segues into, we've got asexual versus sexual reproduction, right? So if we're looking at an asexual individual, right, it is a single organism or a single cell. It is a single object. There is no union of 2 different kinds of cells to get a new functioning adult cell, and they produce an exact copy. Now, this word "exact," right, could be put into quotes here because there are cases where there's mutation, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. The big thing, though, is that there are no gametes no gametic formation. I do not need a sperm cell or an egg cell in order to reproduce asexually. I can just I am a functioning whole cell, and I can break off into a new cell, 2 daughter cells. And here's where the important thing is, right? The chromosome number stays the same. So when we're talking about chromosomes, human cells, we have 23 pairs. We are called diploid because we have pairs of chromosomes. When my skin cells reproduce, I get another cell with 23 pairs of chromosomes. We stay diploid. In meiosis, which would be our sexual reproduction or sexual reproductive methods, we have 2 organisms or 2 kinds of cells. In humans, we have sperm cells and sex cells. In plants, you have pollen, which is the sperm, and you have the ovum, which is the egg, essentially the ovary. And they have to come together because those their chromosomes are haploid. So human sex cells, a human sperm cell has 20. Oops, wrong marker. A human sex cell has 23 chromosomes. Not pairs of chromosomes, just 23 chromosomes, so it's haploid. And those gametes fuse, so if I take 23 plus 23, now I've got 23 pairs, one from the male, one from the female. So these are genetically varied from the parents. They are different than those parent cells, which provides genetic variation. And genetic variation is important, right? When we're talking about bacterial cells, if you introduce an antibiotic, it can wipe out the entire strain of bacteria. Variation in terms of asexual reproduction can come in the form of mutations. So the exact copyright, that's why I put it in quotes, because I can have mutations right? These cells, when they copy themselves, they're not exactly perfect. So if I get a strain of bacteria that's susceptible to an antibiotic, there could be even just one cell that's resistant to that, and now I've got a resistant strain because that copy is passed along to all of the daughter individuals as it reproduces. So genetic variation can come in a variety of ways. If we're looking at sexual reproduction, we're talking about male versus female forming a brand new genetic set. Asexual reproduction, this would be like a mutation. So there's two types of division. We already talked about asexual versus sexual, so we are going to take a look at each of these, and we're going to go up the asexual. We're going to go that way first. So let me rotate this. Oops, I need to switch off of my pen. So I'll rotate this, and we'll look at asexual reproduction. So binary fission, this happens only in prokaryotic organisms. We are only talking about bacterial cells and these prokaryotes are very simple. No nuclear membrane, no organelles, and it's called binary fission because you get not one copy, but two copies of the cell. One cell is split into two copies, so it is binary fission. Then there's also multiple fission, and this can be something like a protist, so a single-celled organism, algae, fungi, things like that. Very simple cells. Fungi are like proto-plant cells. They're precursors to plant cells, so they're less organized. There's less going on there, but they have multiple fission where one parent cell can form multiple daughter cells. There's no set number, but it happens, and you need to understand that there are different kinds of fission where essentially a cell grows and grows, and when it gets too big, it will pinch in the middle and form daughter cells. This is a very fast reproductive cycle. It's a high reproductive rate. Evolutionarily, if I'm a bacterial cell and I'm competing for space or nutrients, the more I can replicate myself, the less the other guy can replicate himself. So they grow and they take up a lot of space very quickly. Thirdly, we have mitosis. Mitosis is asexual. We have a single cell creating an exact copy of itself. Remember, mitosis is more complex. We have 4 phases that these go through. Interphase is not a phase of mitosis. This is the interstitial period. It's the intermittent period, and there are sections of interphase that we're going to look at, but the mitotic phases are prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. And these happen in eukaryotes, so we're talking plant and animal cells, anything that has a complex cell structure. So organelles would fall under this. Right? If I have an organelle that takes care of a particular task, that throws me into that complex cell structure. And this is a longer process. This is on the hours or on the term of hours and days rather than minutes or hours in terms of bacterial cells. And if you get on YouTube, you can see bacterial cell binary fission is very, very fast. And remember that our genetic variation comes from mutations. So there could be a stretch of DNA here, right? And if there is a gene, one cell might get a copy of that gene. Another cell might have some kind of mutation and it gets something else. There is some other change, so there's the original gene, but then there's a mutated section here. That strain is now that strain is now genetically independent or distinguishable from my parent generation. And variation is a good thing because it helps with long-term survivability. So that's a quick overview of our asexual reproductions, and we're going to come back to mitosis in particular. We're going to talk a lot more about that one. But there's also sexual reproduction, so let's look at sexual reproduction. And when we're talking about sexual reproduction, this is meiosis or meiosis. I've heard it said both ways. I don't know if one is right. But we are now looking at the union of 2 cells. We need 2 cells to form a viable individual. So let's go all the way up to the top. So I've got a cell here, and this is where chromosome count becomes very important. So this individual has got 2 pairs of chromosomes. So he has 4 individual chromosomes and 2 pairs. And as we go through, this would be meiosis 1. And again, we're going to do this in much more detail, but these first 2 steps of meiosis 1, my chromosomes duplicate. So now instead of 4 chromosomes, I have 8, and they are homologous. An homologous chromosome is a copy of the same. So we have 8 chromosomes now, 4 pairs, and that cell divides. So this would be mitosis, essentially. We have our chromosomes, they duplicate and they divide, and now you have two new cells with an exact copy of your starting genetic material. But meiosis goes a step further. Meiosis has a second stage. So this would be meiosis 2. Meiosis 2, these cells, the homologous chromosomes, are lined up in the middle again, and then they separate one more time. They do not duplicate. There is no replication in this second step. So when we duplicate, instead of ending up with two daughter cells with the same genetic information like here, we end up with four daughter cells. Four daughter cells. And these four daughter cells have half of the genetic information of the parent cell. And that is why in sexual reproduction, you need to have two of these daughter cells because each one only has half of that information. I cannot form a viable individual. So that's a very, very, very brief and rapid overview of sexual reproduction. We're going to get more in depth in mitosis and meiosis. Hopefully this is a good refresher for you. Please take a look at chapters 10 and 11 in the OpenStax textbook. It's linked in the description if you forgot where to find that. Add this to your notes, and I'll see you in class.